Hey everyone, I wanted to talk today a little bit about vibe coding. Vibe coding has really taken off on Twitter. There's a lot of folks who are in that kind of startup building community where they're just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks, and the AI influencer community as well. So, what is vibe coding? Vibe coding is when you don't write any code, just vibes. You don't have to do anything, you just let AI do it. You don't set up a database, you don't set up templates, you don't do a UI. The most you might do is maybe like an MS Paint drawing that you then give to an AI who generates the HTML, which you then give to your second AI that generates the JavaScript to make that functional, that then you test yourself. Now, this has a lot of interesting implications for us as bug bounty hunters and hackers, right? First of all these applications are going to be very insecure because people do not know how to program. They're just trusting AI's done it properly. And we've already seen this. In fact, my number one tip for you is if you're testing new applications, startups, I really recommend downloading something like Trufflehog and just looking for API keys because they are everywhere. And if you see on Twitter, for example, this is how a lot of vibe coding apps are getting pwned. So really, when it comes to that side of things, the pickings are good. But I also think there's an opportunity here for us as well. Now, a lot of folks often have this discussion in the community of, do you need to know how to code to hack? I am somebody who has a degree in computer science. I know how to program. I know how to program in a bunch of different languages. I did so during my degree, then my time as a developer, and even now I've never worked a job where I haven't used my programming skills. And I use those skills in bug bounty hunting as well. Often when I'm hacking, I'm looking at an application and thinking to myself, how would I have messed this up? What kind of mistakes would I have made? And I use that as the basis to develop my hacking. It's useful to have different perspectives. I'm also coming in with a lot of developer-focused biases as well, and having an open mind. Somebody who perhaps doesn't know how to program is not going to come in with those preconceived notions of what they're going to find. However, coding helps a lot in creating tools. When you're hacking and when you've got a methodology going, you are inevitably going to find parts of that are so annoying to do. Whether that's something like reconnaissance, whether that's something like when I'm testing permission issues and I need multiple accounts, just creating POCs for maybe new CVEs, you're going to be programming. And this is where I think vibe coding has a really good utility for us as hackers, as bug bounty hunters, to actually enable us to create the tools that we wish we had. Now, in terms of tooling for vibe coding, you have a few different options. The first is just using the AI assistant of your choice, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever. Whatever you're already using, you can just get it to generate code for you, and it works. I recently made a labeler for my 3D printing filament. I was programming in ESP32 while I have done C in the final year of my degree. I do not remember writing any C. I know this, like, I can read it, I can figure it out, I can look at it, but a big project like that, I wouldn't have been able to do it as quickly if I wasn't using Gemini and ChatGPT to help me generate the code and understand errors. So that entire project was really created not by me, but by AI. The other thing you can use is IDEs. These IDEs are often built off of Visual Studio Code. They essentially have a more agentic AI flavoring. So the way it works is you'll start up your code, your AI or vibe coding IDE, Cursor, Windsurf, whatever you want to use. Then on the right, you're going to see a box, and that's how you're going to program. So you're going to tell it, hey, I want to make this. It's then going to come up with a plan on how to do that. And it's then going to call different tools that will edit files, create new files. And that's the way it works. Then you have the vibe coding platforms, which are specifically for vibe coding. Things like V0 by Vercel. These take it to the extreme where you don't even see the code anymore. You only see the chat window. So you can think about it as being less and less involved with the code as you move through this. Now, what are some really good tools that you can make? Taking tools you already use and creating UIs for them. If you're already using a lot of console-based commands, that's great. You can do a lot of stuff with the console, but it's not necessarily the friendliest way, particularly when you have to view that data later. Maybe you've got this full system, you've got a mass, you take a mass and you're going to send that to Screenshotter, and then Screenshotter's going to take a screenshot of all these pages that you found via a mass, and then you're going to review them all manually. by just flicking through them. It's not a very efficient use of your time. Maybe you implement AI yourself and do some image recognition. Other really good use case is actually creating new tools. I'm sure there are things in your methodology and your workflow that are really annoying because there always is. So being able to automate that and make it a little bit easier for yourself, huge help, particularly for Burp Suite plugins. My final use case for vibe coding is to create learning resources for yourself. There are really great labs available online for cybersecurity. Portswigger Web Security Academy, TryHackMe, Hack the Box. There are platforms where you can learn about vulnerabilities. One of the things that have always really helped me, when I learn a new vulnerability, I actually learn how to implement it. I'll take a vulnerability, maybe like a CVE, and I'll build the lab environment for that CVE and then experiment with it. Actually building one of these applications, I better understand how to break them. And for me, that's a huge part of my learning process. So I really wanted to share some tips on how to get started with vibe coding for hackers, especially for those who don't have any previous programming experience, how they can start to take advantage of these AI tools and start creating their own tools. So number one is the way you think about code. Now, as somebody who was a developer, the way I think about code is very bottom up. I am very much focused on getting a minimum viable product as quickly as possible. So in my head, I'm taking an application that I want to build. For NahamCon, I made this WebSocket application so I could get some nice screenshots and some GIFs. I was like, okay, I need a basic chat box. And in my head, I'm breaking that down into, okay, I need like text box for the message, submit button, and I need this. Now, vibe coding doesn't really work like that. When you vibe code, you actually need a top-down perspective. Instead of starting at a minimum viable product and adding features as you go and as it gets more complex, if you are doing a top-down perspective, the best thing you can do is start with a chatbot. So start with your Gemini, your Claude, your ChatGPT, and that's where you're going to ideate and get it to generate some design documentation. For example, if you're creating something like an API, you're going to have it create the API routes, list the features, you're going to have it split it into sprints. You're going to have, for your AI, a really clear design document, because that's really important. If you don't have a clear design document, AI struggles to create something decent. Design documents are key. You can actually look at a few online. I'm going to post some links in the description that you can check out. Those are some great places to get started. Because of this top-down perspective, you really need to design up front. Do your best to define what a finished product looks like for you and work from there. When it comes to generating the code, you really want to go feature by feature. You really need to make sure you work on one feature at a time. Often AI code generating bots, particularly something like Windsurf or Cursor, tend to start going off on their own. I've given it a API specification and told it, make this RESTful API and connect it to a NoSQL database. And it's just created, it's gone, I have created all of the routes for users. I am now going to create all of the routes for analytics. You're like, I didn't even include analytics in the list though. This is something you've just made up. They do hallucinate. So you have to rein them in a little bit. If you tell it to do too much at once, it is going to start making sweeping changes across your code base and probably break something. Now with that, my other piece of advice is that you need to keep on top of the testing. Compared to regular development, it is much more testing heavy because when it implements one feature, it'll touch another and break that. Whenever you say add a new feature, test it, test all of your other features, because if you don't have those tests, you're going to end up in a situation where one of your features was working perfectly fine an hour ago, and now it's completely broken and you have no idea why. When you're actually making an application, don't be afraid to go back and try it again. It's often easier to start from scratch and rework an entire file. Don't be afraid to go backwards. If you didn't get the prompt quite right and it hasn't implemented the feature how you want, just go back. I will say, like, very useful tip is at the bottom of all the chat windows, there is a pop-up that says you have this many edits. Make sure you keep that up to date as you do your features, because otherwise you might be in a situation where you have to scroll up quite far to get the working code back, in my experience anyway. don't worry so much about prompts. I think a lot of people are doing very heavy prompt engineering. They're trying to figure out the best prompts to use. When it comes to AI coding, honestly, it's not really about the prompts you use, it's about the design documents. If you don't get a prompt quite right, like just go backwards and it will just delete all the changes it made and then you can just try again. When it comes to deploying applications, my first piece of advice is you probably don't need to have your hacking tools publicly available, particularly if you are not familiar with the language you're programming in. It would be very embarrassing as people who are in cybersecurity to have security vulnerabilities publicly available in your code. You can also get AI to generate things like Docker files. Docker allows you to easily automate the deployment of your application. If you are creating an application where you want other people to be able to set it up, maybe you want to open source it, it's probably a better choice to use Docker, create a Docker file and turn that into an application than it is to deploy it publicly. You've got to be careful of API keys, especially if they're in the raw code. So I wanted to share some of the vibe coding stuff that I've been working on. This was my first big project that I attempted to use vibe coding. And I am a bit hesitant to say first because it took me a few false starts in order to really get the hang of like how to approach vibe coding. So the idea here, and it's a problem I've always had with Generic University, which is that I want to have an API that I can do demonstrations on for YouTube, but that other people can also easily set up and use. And Generic University doesn't quite meet those for a few reasons. One is because it uses an older version of Laravel. I haven't updated it since I released it. And two, I've never been somebody who does a lot of like front-end stuff in JavaScript, which is ironic because I used to work as a front-end developer, but I was mainly doing WordPress. So in my defense, I didn't really do that. But I never really did a lot of front-end JavaScript. And honestly, nowadays, when you see APIs, quite often they are very highly interactive front ends in things like React. And so this is where Vibe-Cappy adoption, Gentle Giants comes in. I'm going to make a full video on this once it's ready and you guys can actually hack on it and stuff like that. But I wanted to show like what I was able to do with Cursor. So this is essentially like a pet adoption website. So it has this full JavaScript front end. You can see it's got all these features. This was entirely done by Cursor. I wrote a little bit of the code, but I was mainly vibe coding it. And you can see it's actually like fairly functional. You have searches. There are multiple users. You can log in, create an account, log into my test account here. You can go in here. You can apply for an adoption. There's an entire form. You can see your adoptions. If I now log in to my admin user, so now I'm logged into the admin user, I'll be able to see more notes about it. So in this case, internal notes, applications. I'll be able to see all applications. So I have multiple user levels. In this case, you've got an admin and you've got a rescue as well. So I can go into here, see the pets at my rescue. Then I can go in here, delete them, edit them, add photos, change the main photograph, save the changes. So it's really a highly interactive front end that works with an API. And this is something that I've always wanted to be able to do with some of my videos, because again, it's nice to have a vulnerable API, but it's even better to be able to see it kind of in practice, how you would see it on an actual target, on an actual website, and really to experiment. Like I said, full video coming to approach like how you would hack this. But then again, this is completely created by Cursor. This is the application in Cursor. I'm just going to change the size here. So you can see this is made up of a few different folders here. And it's a little bit confusing, but the server here, this is the API. So the API runs completely separately. It actually runs on a different port as well. It runs on port 3000. So it's a completely separate service, again, like you'd have in microservice architectures. And this is a very standard Express.js kind of application here. So it has migrations. I put in like a schema. I put in seeders. This all comes from me knowing that these are what I need in order to get it to work and using the right terms. But the majority of this stuff here is all completely generated. So these controllers here, you can see, completely done by AI. And I think the best example of how you can tell is because there's actually comments on it. We've then got the local S3. This is a very simple application that basically just allows you to upload images. This is the one I had a lot of problems with because it really wanted to just implement S3 buckets, like the Amazon AWS API, because I'd called it local S3. My idea there being, oh, it's like an S3 bucket, but it's local. Not a very good name. Very much confused Cursor. In the client here, we have the full front end of the application. So this is all done in React, and you can see here, again, this is completely generated by AI. I know some React in the sense that I could edit this, it's not that hard, but for the most part, I pretty much trusted it. I use this as my main API specification. So I had a lot of problem getting it to generate intentionally vulnerable code because it kept on trying to fix it. So I decided I'm just going to make it secure, and then I'll figure everything out. So I actually defined here every data type, like the data type it would be, the parameters in the database, any of the details, and then I listed all the API endpoints here. I will say it still tried to hallucinate some of my other API endpoints, especially at the very start. That's where I quickly learned that I need to go like one feature at a time rather than giving it this entire design document and going, design this. And if I scroll here and look at some of the like other chat messages that I did. So when I first started up here, you can see that honestly, my prompts are very short. Recreate the users, add 2 users to the seeder, 2 normal accounts, 2 rescue accounts, and an admin account. Reset the database. A lot of the time I did not have very detailed information for the AI. And when I did, I mainly just, in this case, this is a line in the console where there was an error message that appeared. And I was just like, this should be created at, not date registered. Oftentimes for some of this though, you can actually just go in here and get it to just do it based on the error. So here's one where I was doing the demonstration and it broke. Often I was just able to copy the data from like the error messages in the console, and then it would come up with a fix. A lot of the time though, some errors would like cascade downwards. So this was the fact that this JSON string in the database wasn't being passed correctly. I had to find everything where it was not being passed and then also flag anything else once I knew what the error messages were. But I really want to show you here that, you know, actually getting it to create functional code like this one here, you really don't need complex prompts. You really don't need much more than a sentence and then some context. So in this case, I've got admin users, can't edit pets like rescues can. They should be able to edit every pet, even if they're not associated with the rescue in the UI. And then I had to explicitly give it this file because otherwise it'd get lost looking through the code base. This is a pretty big project. I think it's over 3,000 lines of code. So it just doesn't have the context in the AI model to actually process it. But honestly, I was really impressed. This is not something that was done very quickly. It's intentionally vulnerable, so it doesn't really matter anyway. But definitely in terms of actually getting like a full JavaScript front end, there is no way I could do that on my own. I don't have the skills in JavaScript to do it. So for me, it was great. And I already knew what I was looking for. So I was really relying on it for the UI more so than the API itself. But that's the kind of big project that I completed with Cursor. I'll do a quick demonstration of like how to get started. So this is what you'll see when you open Cursor. So I have the pro version of Cursor. This is free for students. So if you're a student or have an academic email address, you are able to actually use Cursor Pro. So first thing you're going to do is just create your project. And then you'll essentially be given this. So these are your files on this side. This is where your code is going to be. And this is the chat box on the other side. Now, the first thing you should do whenever you get started with any Cursor project is always have a design doc. Now, the best way to generate that, as I said, is to go to something like Gemini or ChatGPT and get it to write a design doc. So once you have your design document that another AI has written, then it's time to go feature by feature. So I'm going to start with telling Cursor to generate like a starting place. So when it comes to these terminal commands, I've got mine set up to just automatically run just to make it easier. Just let it do it. So I'm just going to wait for this to create the kind of startup thing here. So where this says here, cannot edit files blocked by global ignore, that's a cursor setting. And that's going to stop cursor from editing files with .env in them. You can edit your cursor rules yourself in your application. And here you can see these are the user rules, these are the project rules. And then if you want to include these cursor rules files, you can. So this is an example of a cursors rules file. You have assistant rules, you have like the technology stacks, you have your coding process, and this will basically change how cursor works. Now there is a full list called awesome cursor rules, which have these like just listed so you can experiment with them and just pick whichever ones you like. But for the most part, you don't necessarily need them. Not unless you are like creating proper applications with it. So in some cases you can see here, it's like for the backend run, these are like commands you have to run yourself. In this case, my other thing is still running. And you can see here, it's loaded up in another tab, but it's just created the home page. So it's got to start. What do we do next? Well, next up is where we go into our core features. So you see here where I've got like these split up by like 4.1, 4.2. Now, if you do get errors, the easiest thing to do is just to copy and paste them into the chat box and let cursor figure it out. In some cases, it might be able to just solve the problem itself. In other cases, not so much. Sometimes you have to help it out by giving it more information or getting it to put debug statements so it knows what the data looks like. Probably the biggest con when using cursor is really that it doesn't have a good sense of what the data looks like. So it does get a bit confused. Now, if you're not happy with how it's doing something, you can always press stop, go up here, and then change it. In this case, I've said I wanted a NoSQL database. It's like, okay, we'll switch to MongoDB. Let's pick SQLite instead, because we don't want to have a full database. It's going to ask you, submit from previous message, and it's going to say whether you not want to continue and revert. So I always do continue and revert here. So I will always go back to that. Again, if I wanted to go back up here and change this and add to this prompt, I could. And again, I've just kind of let it do whatever it wants. In this case, it's also installed a new dependency. I don't really care what dependencies it's using, so I'm just going to let it do whatever it wants here because, again, it's not really that important for me. If you do want it to use specific technology, though, that is where you would specify it in your cursor rules in the technology stack. So in this case, backend, front end, LLM integration. So in this case, I've got this set up as my front end and my back end. I have not found that I really needed to edit these or even use them in most cases. I could just get away with doing it. I'm going to refresh the page here and I'm going to notice it's still not working. This, and I can see I've got an error. So what I'm going to do with this error is I'm just going to go into here. I'm going to copy this and just paste it into the chat. And this is broadly like how you make applications with cursor. You send it the error messages it's produced, and then you give it to it and say, fix this, and you just let it go, and then you refresh the page or start the application again and see whether or not it's fixed. I'll be honest, it's not the most fun thing at the start, but once it gets going, it's a lot better. Especially if it starts adding dependencies, it's a lot worse. And that's how you program in cursor. I mean, it's super straightforward, it's super easy. For the most part, like you don't really need to know what you're doing. And even when it gets error messages, it will often just fix them for you, especially if it's in the chat window like this one here. And again, you have full control over the code here. This is just Visual Studio Code. If you already use add-ons or VS Code, you can just import your preferences directly from Visual Studio Code. I really recommend giving coding a try, particularly if you're not very comfortable with coding, if it's not something you're familiar with. I think it's a great opportunity for you to have access to something that otherwise you wouldn't have had access to. In terms of recommendations, best AI code editor in my experience has been Cursor. Best AI assistant that can generate code, I found I got the best results with Gemini 2.5 Pro. Best way to deploy, Docker for sure. Docker is super easy. That's my recommendation on toolset. So hopefully that's given you some ideas about how to use vibe coding, how you can take advantage of this, and hopefully help you find some cool bugs or just make your methodology a lot easier. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Bye everyone.